Please be seated. Well, it is the first Sunday after Easter. I wonder, are you still feeling that glow from last week? Sometimes we keep it through the week. Sometimes we crash fairly quickly in a spiritual sense. It's almost like every mountaintop should have a sign that says, "Caution, valley ahead." So if you're feeling that way today, be assured you're probably in good company. Now, if you're a child, or actually if you just like coloring and you'd like a reminder of Easter, there are markers and nice things in the back, so please don't hesitate to go get one for yourself or even just to keep yourself awake. Anyway, we're picking up today where we left off. We left off, last week at verse 18 of John chapter 20, and this week we're picking up with verse 19. Feel free to keep that passage in front of you using the Bibles in front of you. Last week we heard that wonderful story about John and Peter and especially Mary, who learns my place with Jesus, my place of belonging, it's still here. I belong to Jesus, Jesus belongs to me. That can't change regardless of everything else that might change. Now, I didn't mention last week that that's actually the first in a mini-series, a mini Easter series we're going to do. And today's topic is not belong, that was last week, it's believe. How many times did we hear in the gospel reading today, believe? 6 times, just in case you're wondering. Believe. And next week we'll do be transformed. That's our little progression. Belong, believe, be transformed. So, picking up in verse 19, we left Mary feeling joyous, but now we're with the disciples in the upper room. 10 disciples, and how are they feeling? Well, it says they've locked the doors for fear of the Jewish leaders. They're afraid, and they have good reason to be afraid. They're still on Jerusalem's most wanted list. So what is the only reasonable thing to do? Lock the door, hunker down, imagine worse scenarios. So Mary came and told us this crazy story, but Mary is a bit crazy, so whatever. Yeah, moving on. We're scared. And then something happens. Wasn't it amazing? They see the risen Lord come to them. Oh, wouldn't we all like to see Jesus come to us through that wall? I mean, my faith needs a little boost. How about yours? Or maybe just go from unbelief to belief. That would convince me. Could I please have a moment like that? Yeah, personally, never had a moment like that. So just because, and this was brought home to me on my first trip that I made with Open Doors. You know, I used to travel around the world to visit our brothers and sisters in the places where faith is most difficult. And the first trip I made was to Morocco, a relatively gentle place to start out. And I was being introduced to a community, and I was invited to a meeting that was happening in an upper room, not unlike perhaps this one. And the person leading the meeting said, right, we're going to go around the room, sitting on these Moroccan benches around the room, and we're all going to say how we came to faith. So we'll start with the person next to me and go around, and I would have the privilege of going last. Marvelous. So, first one, I had a vision. I saw Jesus and, oh, great, okay. I was really sick, and I was healed, and I heard the word Isa, Jesus. Amazing. I had a Bible fall on my head, and I opened it, okay. Every single one of the testimonies involved something supernatural. And as they went around, and it takes a while for people in some cultures to tell their stories, as they went around, my apprehension built. What in the world am I going to say? I don't have one of these stories. It kind of feels like being a spiritual failure if we don't have one of those stories relative to somebody else. And maybe the 10 disciples in the upper room felt like spiritual failures. I mean, what if Mary were right and Jesus appeared to her and not to them? I mean, they don't have the faith. They're afraid. But Jesus, he knows they need this. I mean, it is only the first Easter day. And so he has mercy on them, and he comes and appears in the locked room. And we should measure how just incredible this is. It's not like we figured out how to do it in the past 2,000 years. It's not some conjurer's trick that we now kind of, it's okay, I can do that. No, this is the sort of thing where if you have that personal experience, it will blow your mind. And even if you do get to be called, you are called crazy afterwards, you can't help yourself from talking about it because it was real. Going through walls, seeing miracles of healing, these are personal experiences not to be ignored. And so those first disciples, they became kind of like courtroom witnesses. I don't know if any of you has ever done jury duty. Do you get called for jury duty? No? Yes, some people have. Yeah, you have. Okay. It's a big responsibility, isn't it? And one of the ways you make your decision is you hear witnesses, testimonies, people who come along and say, I saw this is what I saw, this is how it happened, A, B, C. And not all of the witnesses say exactly the same thing, because if they use the same words, that would be really suspicious. But then you make a decision based on those expert testimonies. And that's basically what we have. We have all of the gospel writers who are saying, I saw, I heard, I leave you my testimony. And they weren't just those four. John is careful to say Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. And Paul writes in Corinthians, Jesus appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. Go ask them. Now, we might be tempted to think, oh yeah, but that was 2,000 years ago. Maybe they were kind of gullible at the time, slightly primitive human beings. No, this is Rome. They're rational adults just like we are. They reason the way we are. That's one of the reasons that Luke, who didn't see Jesus in person but heard from those first witnesses, he acts like an investigative journalist. And he starts his gospel by saying, many have undertaken to drop an account of the things that have been fulfilled just as they were handed down to us from those first eyewitnesses. With this in mind, I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning. And I too decided to write an orderly account for you, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. He understood we need to know. We are rational beings. And in fact, his account is so good that the skeptical archaeologist, Sir William Ramsay, spent 20 years checking out whether Luke and Paul's accounts stood the test of time. It stood up to academic scrutiny, and he concluded that Luke should be placed along with the very greatest historians. I wonder if we realize how solid these accounts are. If you just look at literary kind of pedigree, The Bible has better literary pedigree than writings of Homer, Caesar's Gallic Wars, Livy, who wrote the History of Rome, and Plato. We don't need to be ashamed of this. But beyond all that, the point of it is what John led us to. He said, I'm writing this so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Not just believing that God exists, because James says, yeah, even the demons do that and they have the good sense to shudder. No, this is believing that means that there's some kind of response in my heart, an acknowledgement that this is God. And that response, well, Thomas, he exemplifies it for us, doesn't he? Because Jesus knows that Thomas missed out on the personal experience, and he has mercy on Thomas. He doesn't show up and go, are you serious? These 10 guys told you what happened, and you didn't believe them? Who do you think, do you think they drank the same juice as Mary? No. He stands there openly, calmly. First he says, peace. Now, touch my sides. See my hands. I understand you are a rational human being. Go ahead. It's true. But then he says something more extraordinary. He says, because you've seen me, you have believed. But blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Who have not seen and yet have your response. Thomas's response was, my Lord and my God. That was the appropriate response. But Jesus calls us to something more. Believe with faith. The writer to the Hebrews says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And it is this kind of faith that we're called to. When I was in that room in Morocco, sitting in that upper room, and I saw them going around, and it was going to be my turn, I had to just tell them my story. I came to faith when I was 7 years old, in a Sunday school class. I grew in my faith, and I was baptized when I was 12 because I had a personal conviction. When I was 14, it finally occurred to me that maybe I should give back to God as opposed to just taking. I studied the Bible, kind of like you do. I went through struggles. I can't have children, and I wondered if God kind of had forgotten me. But that's the story of my faith. I grew to know God as I grew in life. That's all there is to it. They looked at me and they went, "Hallelujah! It's a miracle!" Sorry? You didn't have a healing? You didn't have a vision? You didn't have a dream? And yet you believed? Praise God! Wow. I was blown away. They said, "We've never seen anything like that." That's amazing. And it gives us hope for our children, because we know our children, they're not having dreams and visions because they have the Bible and church and us telling them our stories. We pray that they grow up to be like you. Amazing. It's so easy to think my faith story is nothing. And yet all of our faith stories are precious, and all of our faith stories are valid, and we do not need to be ashamed of them. Jesus said to Thomas, "Stop doubting and believe." The word in Greek is "stop unbelieving, believe. And that's his call to us today. However much belief we have in our hearts, walk away from the unbelief. Hold on to the faith as we follow whoever we understand Christ to be today. We're going to have a little exercise in affirming our faith. What is it we believe? And we can say it, saying, Lord, help me in my unbelief, but I do believe. As we come to say together the creed.